The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, this is Sara Butler with FaithTrust Institute. I want to welcome you to today's roundtable conversation about campus sexual assault. I'll introduce our presenters in just a few moments, but first I want to go over a few technical details. First of all, you should be able to hear me through your earphones or your telephone. If you're having problems with the sound, I suggest that you make sure that your headset or speakers are plugged in and that your volume is turned up. If you're having other technical problems, I recommend that you exit the webinar, return to the link in your email, and then reconnect that way. All the audience members are muted throughout the conversation. If you have questions or comments, you can submit them anytime using the question feature on the right side of your screen, and we would love to hear from you. Please submit your questions anytime during the presentation. I'll hold on to them until the Q&A at the end of the presentation, and we'll have about 15 minutes and hopefully get to as many of your questions as possible. If you don't see the question box, click on the small orange arrow on the right side of your screen to expand the feature options. The slides that you see today will be emailed to you as a PDF later this afternoon, so you'll have them as a resource. And lastly, we're recording this webinar to make it available to those who can't join us for the live session. So we welcome anyone who may be listening in the future. We want to thank the In Faith Community Foundation for sponsoring today's presentation. This is one of 12 in a series in 2015 that In Faith Community Foundation is sponsoring. They are a national charity with the mission to serve donors, spread joy, and change lives. This series of webinars is part of their Ending Family Violence initiative, and we're very grateful for their partnership. They've sponsored dozens of webinars in the past few years, and you can find recordings for most of those on our website. Please visit infaithfound.org to read more about all the great work they're doing, and again, thank you to them. Today's presenters, we are honored to have Reverend Dr. Lucy Forster-Smith. She is the Sedgwick chaplain to the university and senior minister to the Memorial Church at Harvard University. She spent her career in higher education as a college and university chaplain. Dr. Sara Koplik is the Director of Community Outreach for the Jewish Federation of New Mexico. In that capacity, she also serves as the Director of Hillel at the University of New Mexico. She's the editor of the New Mexico Jewish Link and just published a political and economic history of the Jews of Afghanistan. Unfortunately, Melissa Lou Ellis, who is a student at the University of New Mexico and is part of the Department of Justice investigation at UNM, has come down with a stomach flu and won't be joining us today, but she's given Sara answers to some of today's questions, and Sara will share Melissa's responses with us, and we're sorry that she can't be with us. And last but not least, Reverend Dr. Marie Fortune is the founder and strategic analyst at FaithTrust Institute, and she'll be moderating today's conversation. And just a reminder, audience members, if you have questions, please submit them anytime using the question box on the right side panel. And then Marie, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Sara, and greetings to everyone. Thank you for joining us for this conversation today. We're going to begin with a quick poll just to see who all you are. And Sara's going to put that up. And if you would just respond to let us know your role in your faith community or if you're an advocate or activist. And I'll give you a moment to do that. And Sara, will we see the results of this?
Yeah, I'll post the results. It'll just take a moment for people to respond.
Right, okay. So as you're doing that, let me just begin by providing a little context. Over the past few years, we've seen a burgeoning movement of activism around the issue of campus sexual assault, which has brought the issue into the spotlight in ways that are challenging our educational institutions and empowering activists and survivors. So why is that happening now? Because sexual assault on campus isn't new, but this public discussion and the demand that colleges and universities be held accountable is new. This week's case at Baylor University, highlighting the failures of both university and the criminal justice system, is just the latest example. And if you're not familiar with that, I would encourage you to just Google Baylor University sexual assault, and you will see the details of that case. Our poll is that 25% of you are lay leaders, 25% are activists, and 50% are other. That's very interesting. I'm trying to know who the others are. And I'm very concerned that there are no clergy on this call, so we'll talk about that later. But in any case, some background for context. I'm going to provide a very simplistic overview of what are very complicated legal, social, and cultural issues at play here. Some of you may be familiar with some of this, where this issue sits now, particularly on the legal side. Title IX is a federal civil rights law that was passed in 1972, requiring colleges and universities that receive federal funding to ensure equal access to education. It outlawed sexual discrimination. Schools are legally required to respond and remedy hostile educational environments. Failure to do so can result in the school losing federal funding. Title IX is most well known for ensuring female athletes equal access to sports. The Clery Act is a federal law that requires universities and colleges to disclose information about crimes on campus. And the 2013 Violence Against Women Act expanded the Clery Act to more vigorously address prevention efforts and investigation of sexual assault. And these new rules went into effect July 1, 2015. So both of these laws are overseen by the U.S. Department of Education. In 2011, the Department of Education released a document called the Dear Colleague Letter that clarified that sexual violence, as well as harassment, creates a hostile educational environment that interferes with students' abilities to learn and participate fully in their education. Title IX regulations therefore apply to sexual violence as well as harassment. With this 2011 letter, the Department of Education gave students a tool for holding colleges accountable. And the past 4 years have seen investigations of over 117 schools by the Department of Education. And at least 2 cases have been investigated by the Department of Justice. Today's roundtable discussion won't necessarily delve into the particulars of these laws, but it's important to know this context in which educational institutions are functioning and students are living. Our participants are bringing different and important perspectives to the topic. And our particular interest here at FaithTrust is on how our faith communities on campus or related to campuses are moving to respond to this very serious problem faced by students. I want to let the audience members know that we may be discussing things that are very difficult today and hearing from Melissa as a survivor. So please feel free to exit the webinar at any time if you feel like you're just overwhelmed and need to step out. As you see, the statistics on campus sexual assaults that we have at this point are pretty outrageous in my opinion. But that's what is now before us in terms of public awareness and activism on campus. So Lucy Forster-Smith, I'd like to start with you. As someone who's been on university campuses for more than 20 years in campus ministry, give us your sense of how things are now, how they've changed, what you've seen over the years.
Well, I'm delighted to do that. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I have served campuses on state universities. I've served campuses, private liberal arts campuses, and now am at Harvard University. Much of my work has really centered on at the intersection of justice issues and religious communities, mobilizing them to be able to respond to issues of justice and making our campuses safe for students. So through these years, I think if I think back to 20 years ago, I was just starting my ministry at Macalester College in Minnesota. And I'll never forget that even early on at my time there, I was in a circle of students about the second month that I was there. And the topic that ended up being in this women's spirituality group for the evening was, when have you or someone else experienced violence in your relationships with those you've dated, or stranger violence, which I think speaks a lot to the sort of need for students to find safe spaces to be able to deal with questions of violence. But in this particular instance, it was interesting that they came into the room in a space that was designated as a women's spirituality circle and began to talk about incidences of violence. And I was stunned. I will be honest, there were 12 women in that circle, and every one of them had either personally experienced some issue of sexual violence or harassment, or they knew someone who had. So needless to say, as we've seen already with the statistics, this is pervasive on campus. But I think it's a good example to start, because I think at that point, those students were needing to share the experience in more private settings. And what I've watched evolve over the last 20 years since that experience is that campuses have begun to not only talk about this issue publicly, and many campuses do, I would say most campuses in this country do a opportunity to share statistics with students at new student orientation and other places to say that this is a very, very pervasive and dangerous situation for young people to be in. And this crosses over not only women, but men, transgendered, across the board in terms of where these issues are showing up. But I do think over the years that campuses have begun to take at least some educational responsibility for sharing statistics, for helping students know that it happens here as well as elsewhere, as we've seen. And I also think that students are much more aware of their rights in terms of they do not need to be put in positions of being assaulted in party situations, but when it does happen, or other situations, but when it does happen, they also seem to be more aware of what the mechanisms are for support for prosecution, both within the college university system as well as with seeking out the courts, the civil angle in that. I think another way that things have changed is that there seem to be more resources within counseling centers, within chaplaincy circles and other places. And by resources, I mean both information, but also people who have been specifically trained to respond to this. I know at Harvard University we have Title IX officers, and we also have a Center for the Prevention of Sexual Assault and Education around those issues. So universities are, I think, stepping into this in some pretty helpful ways, but honestly, there is still a lot to be done.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you, Lucy.
Mm-hmm.
We had hoped to have Melissa Lou Ellis with us today, a student at the University of New Mexico, but she is ill, and Sara Koplik is going to share Melissa's responses when we talked with her to some of the questions that we posed. So we asked Melissa to tell us about her experience as a survivor who is fighting for justice now on a university campus. Sara?
Thank you. So let me tell you Melissa's story. During her freshman year, many of her friends were in the Greek system. Her best friend Paolo is a member of the Sigma Chi fraternity. One summer evening, they met two new members of that fraternity, Gavin Reese-Bigger and Dustin Lutigen, who invited them to Gavin's dorm room. As they started to socialize, both Paolo and Melissa were drugged and became incapacitated. Dustin took Paolo back to his room, and Gavin proceeded to attack Melissa. When she screamed, he strangled her. The sexual assault occurred over a series of many hours and was very violent. At several points, she tried to flee unsuccessfully, but Gavin threatened to kill her. Finally, in the early morning hours of Saturday, she was able to flee. Melissa went home and called two friends from high school who told her, "Put your clothes in a plastic bag. Don't brush your teeth. Don't take a shower. Go to the hospital." They picked her up and took her to the University of New Mexico hospital. The emergency room didn't have any space in the adult area, so she was taken to the pediatric area. Two officers from the Albuquerque Police Department arrived, but neither had a pen nor a piece of paper to take her statement. She was not treated at the hospital and was left alone in an exam room for 4 to 5 hours. Finally, a police officer came and picked her up and brought her to the sexual assault examiner's office, which is in another part of the city. They gave her an advocate, and the exam took many hours, lasting until early Sunday morning. During this process, a DEA officer connected to the police department of the university arrived. He promised her that Gavin would be arrested that day. Gavin was never arrested in Albuquerque, not by the university police, and not by the city police. Finally, Melissa returned home, where a huge fight erupted with her parents, who did not believe that she had been raped and blamed her for the attack. On Monday morning, she went to the University of New Mexico Office of Equal Opportunity and filed a complaint. If she hadn't have filed a complaint that very morning, no further steps would have been taken by the university. The dean of students gave Gavin an emergency suspension, but 2 weeks later, he was on campus following Melissa around at a welcome back event. When she went to the staff of the Student Activities Center, who were running the program, to ask for help, they refused to help her and thought it was a joke. Despite all of this, Melissa wanted to join a sorority. During this process, the UNM staff member in charge of oversight of the Greek system told her that none of the sororities wanted to have her as a member. This wasn't true, as one house specifically requested her. The following week, the director of the Student Activities Center told her that she should leave the school or go abroad because of the hostile environment that she created. Soon, the dean of students revoked Gavin's suspension without notifying her, and at a tailgate party, she ran into him. And there, she asked the UNM Police Department for help. They refused because they couldn't find the no-contact order. In the fall, Melissa attended an away football game in Las Cruces, which is 4 hours south of us, at the New Mexico State University. Gavin and Dustin were both there. Gavin pushed her down to the ground and grabbed her friend. The friend got New Mexico State's campus police, who filed charges against Gavin for assault and violation of a restraining order. He was arrested and spent 1 night in jail. Later, this case was dropped in magistrate court, but the district attorney in Las Cruces refiled it in district court, where it remains. The Rape Crisis Center helped her find a criminal attorney who asked her if she would like to meet with the Department of Justice representatives. They flew in, and Melissa went through her experiences, detailing each way that the university broke Title IX. She also hired 2 civil attorneys who filed an intent to sue the university and gave them a letter. From that time, sexual assault prevention activities on our campus started. Over this past year, both of Melissa's civil cases, one against the University of New Mexico and one against the Sigma Chi fraternity, were dropped. The district attorney dropped her criminal case, but the Attorney General is still looking into it.
Thank you, Sara. Unfortunately, Melissa's experience is all too common. The same kinds of experiences have been shared by women and men in many university settings across the country. We asked Melissa if she had found any allies or help, particularly within the university, who had responded and helped her through the process. And what did she say?
She said, at the beginning, the Women's Resource Center was supportive, but then she believes that they were ordered to not interact with her. The Disability Office of the university has provided her with a letter that ensures that all of her class absences are excused due to PTSD, and that's the only help she's received from the university.
Mm-hmm.
That's been the extent of it.
And Sara, talk about your role and your support of Melissa through this, which I think is very important.
Sure. So I'm a part-time Hillel director. I'm employed by the Jewish Federation of New Mexico. I have received no formal training for this role. I'm neither a member of the clergy nor a mental health professional. In fact, as my bio says, I'm actually a historian by training. My role at Hillel House is to basically be a nurturer. I lead services and prepare meals and encourage our young people to find their own path to Judaism. My #1 goal is to create safe space, and I work hard to ensure that. And now that means calling the police when necessary, which is usually about once a year, to escort inappropriate, violent individuals off of our property. And I also watch student interactions very carefully to make sure that they are appropriate and that they continue to be appropriate. And Melissa is not the only student who has disclosed sexual violence to me. Her case is more egregious because of that she was drugged and kidnapped, but it's all too common, unfortunately. As far as idea of what the numbers that we serve, I have about 20 kids who attend weekly Shabbat dinners, and about 2/3 are male. But as young people begin to trust me, the stories also arrive. But it does take some time for them to gain trust of me. But there was a period last fall when I heard accounts from young women and also one young man about every other week. This past year, 2 young women temporarily stayed at Hillel House seeking refuge, one from domestic violence and the other from sexual assault. And I know that I'm not doing enough. I am fully aware of my lack of training, and I know that we need to have a therapeutic group run by a professional for my students. I haven't been able to do that yet, but I hope to set one up soon. And yeah.
Well, what's most important is you're simply there and willing to be a safe place, like as Lucy said, for students to come. So the Campus Save Act, which went into effect in July, mandates the prevention efforts on campuses. And I know it's too early to really see how this is going to work, but we did ask Melissa if there had been prevention programs on campus already and what was her perception of those. And her response, Sara?
She said, before her attorneys presented the university with an intent to sue letter last September, there were very limited programs on campus. There was a 1-hour session where all fraternity and sorority members were brought together to listen to one speaker. Non-Greek students were not allowed in, and neither men nor women took the speaker seriously. They ignored the lecturer and texted throughout the session. Since then, there have been some changes, but Melissa feels that it is all a facade, and that's what she finds the most frustrating.
For sure. Mm-hmm. So Melissa is still a student there at the University of New Mexico, and what is her sense of the continued impact on her as she tries to get her education?
Right, it's a real struggle, and she wrote that 2 other women were a part of the initial Department of Justice investigation at the University of New Mexico. One was gang raped by 3 football players, and the other was raped at the SAE fraternity house. Both were harassed and humiliated by their peers, faculty, and staff. They were harmed when reaching out to the media, too. Both have left campus. Melissa is the only one who remains, as her parents will not allow her to transfer schools, as they don't believe that she was really raped. Melissa continues to endure very regular verbal harassment by fraternity members on campus. The day after she refused a plea agreement with her assailant, her car was damaged by a vehicle with blue paint. Gavin Bigger's car is blue. Melissa believes that he purposely damaged her car as a way of trying to intimidate her. She doesn't feel safe walking on campus and between classes alone. In fact, last year she asked for campus security to escort her to class. They always arrived 1 hour late, so that she was 1 hour late to every single class. Inevitably, the security guards were old men who said to her, quote, "In all of my years, I never had to do this. Why do I have to do this now?" Eventually, she stopped asking for escorts, but she remains, quote, very afraid.
Lucy, how do you experience the prevention efforts being addressed on campus at this point?
I think that my Hillel students are very supportive of prevention programs, as they are aware of the widespread culture of violence against women on campus. But so far, I don't believe that any of these programs address the problem to any significant extent. I just haven't seen that from this university, unfortunately. I'm horrified by the prevalence of sexual assault on this campus. It is the most serious issue that we face with our students, and all of my other concerns pale in comparison. But as Reverend Forster-Smith stated before, what is new is that women are no longer remaining anonymous, and that they are demanding justice, however distant it may still remain. I mean, I think it's extraordinary and profoundly brave that Melissa is willing to use her full name and photograph while telling this very painful, terrible story. Categorically, she rejects shaming, and because of her bravery and willingness to take that first step, our society may begin to change, however slowly, however imperceptibly at first.
Mm-hmm. Well, she is remarkable in her capacity to take the steps that she has taken. Lucy, how have you seen prevention working where you've been in recent years?
Well, let me begin at Harvard. It's sort of interesting. I actually yesterday just met with the Title IX person from the university, just happened to have a conversation with her, and it worked out well in anticipation of being with you today. And I actually asked her that question in terms of what she's seeing and then my own experience as well. I think that what's interesting is that there are efforts that are sometimes coming from some unexpected places. For example, one of the captains of the football team has stepped into, at least in a couple of years ago, and probably even now, has stepped into a very, very public role in terms of advocating for a, violent-free campus. And I think student leadership in very, very prominent roles of being in a place where they're beginning to step out and say, we're not going to tolerate this, both from our peers as well as making this campus unsafe for anyone. And I think that, in a sense, maybe well-positioned campus leaders, student leaders, who are in places that you wouldn't necessarily expect that advocacy to come from, are pretty powerful, at least guardians of what they might call their desire to have a campus that's safe for everyone. So there's one that's a little sign of hope, I guess you would say, that's out there. But one other thing that I thought was really interesting that she said that I knew, being in the work that I do, I see more individual efforts from different areas or from different, like student affairs doing some things, counseling centers doing some things, the chaplaincy is doing some things. Everybody seems to be doing their own thing, but and beginning to think of how to tie those efforts together. And one of the things that this colleague said about that is that they find that probably the most effective prevention efforts happen when they happen coming from multiple places. So in other words, prevention education at orientation, but then ongoing prevention education in residences, and then ongoing prevention education through sexual assault and prevention centers. But then moving that not only to the educational piece, but then having small group discussions and working at a more kind of intimate level around conversations about how this impacts all students and leaders. And then the third thing she talked about was in the classroom, which I think is a really, really interesting, I'm sorry, a really interesting piece of this as well, because I think often we think of the efforts happening out of the classroom, but to have faculty take up opportunities to do research, to have students do investigation, not in any legal way, but investigation of what are the issues of how does this issue show up on campus both historically and contemporarily? How does it tie to women's and gender studies, and how does it tie to other areas of even international studies? What happens across the range of cultures and the kind of cultural assumptions? I know that study abroad, for example, that a lot of students go abroad, and one of the areas that's very important in a preventative way, but also in a responsive way when students come back from study abroad, and anticipating that is to help students understand kind of norms and different cultural assumptions around these issues in other places. So you can see, I guess, where I'm going with this is that multiple places on campus, that there need to be multiple venues for the conversation, and then to have places where those issues get tied together. And I guess what I would say from the chaplain perspective and religious life and spiritual life perspective is that we in some ways can be in a really, really exciting place to be able to know where all of these things are happening, because we're sort of generalists in the way that we work on campuses, and then provide ways of making linkages among the people who are carrying out these efforts across campus, and help them begin to say, you know, safe campus and prevention is absolutely a core value, if you will, for all institutions of higher education.
Yeah, this is Marie. I really agree with you, Lucy, in terms of the importance of a comprehensive response. It's kind of a subset of our efforts to promote comprehensive response in the wider community to sexual and domestic violence. But because you all are living and working in a community defined by the college or university, within that community, it's critical that everybody be on board and everybody be contributing. And it looks to me like, from what I keep hearing from folks, that that's where the gaps are. That you know, there's some key pieces not working, and there's not a shared commitment across the community to address this. What about specifically the bystander intervention training efforts that we've read some about, and the affirmative sexual consent education? I was concerned, Sarah, with Melissa's description of the response in the one session they did have for the Greek students, of nobody paying any attention. And it's sort of, you know, how do we really create a context in which the students really begin to take this seriously and are part of the training and the prevention efforts? Do you have any thoughts?
Well, I mean, I see one grassroots initiative which has started this semester on this campus called Revoking Silence, of students helping students. There is also a university-led initiative called Lobo Respect, but it's not as well received from the victims of sexual assault as the Revoking Silence, which seeks to have more like a buddy system to help survivors cope in their day-to-day lives with all of the challenges that they face. I don't know. I agree. I think it comes from the top. And as you can hear in her story, the levels of negligence and profound administrative incompetence, I mean, are staggering, and extremely disheartening. There has been no justice. And so I think it goes back to individual levels of talking openly about sexual assault on campus with all of our young people. and as Lucy mentioned, in multiple different places. Ultimately, we hope to, change the whole dynamics of our society, where women and girls are valued and empowered and believed. Of course, that's our end result. But in the meantime, it starts with a whole bunch of little sort of pebbles, with listening and sharing and believing. And that's why Melissa really wanted you to hear her story and her truth. And now that we've shared it, I hope that you'll be able to take a little bit of her courage with you, and that in more venues that we'll be able to talk about violence and abuse against women and girls, and work to make our own communities safer, better.
Yeah.
And I think the change to the lowering level of shame is really an important positive change, and that is brand new. I think that's a really important part of it. That's a major change. I think unfortunately sexual assault is terribly common on campus, and just now is beginning to be maybe reported a little bit more frequently than it was before. But that's not talking about really prevalence. Yeah, so those are my opinions.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right about the issue of shaming, and again, that stretches into the wider culture as well. But I'm most encouraged by the student activists' response to that, and it is the courage of individuals, but also folks who are organizing around that in terms of the bystander intervention efforts and the affirmative sexual consent discussions, the kind of leadership that, Lucy, you're talking about coming from a football player, I think are really significant possibilities. And it's sort of, the university needs to be doing its part as an institution, but also the efforts of students need to be supported by the university and the faculty, so that the student activism is not over against, but is in fact integral to the concerns of the university. And again, it doesn't sound like that's been Melissa's experience, but hopefully the student groups there that you're describing, Sara, will be able to change some of that.
Yeah, I hope so.
Well, and I think that there just needs to be a sort of level of outrage on the part of students with administrators, with policies, with a kind of sense of we don't believe this really happened. I mean, this is 2014. I'm sorry, 2015, but her experience was 2014. This is no different. So the other thing that I want to at least put on the table for response from other people is just a sense of the tie between alcohol and some of these assaults. So there's that piece, and then also just some conversation about this kind of hookup culture and sort of the assumptions about sexual expression and the confusion about sexual expression and violence. I think because there is in a campus culture kind of sense of people are exploring their sexuality. They're really in a place where should be a place that's very safe for them to do that, and not to be in a situation where they find themselves violated or feeling incredibly demeaned, or all of the kind of nuances of that. So I think that, at least from my experience with students, that they describe situations as it's very confusing, not only in terms of what they're doing, but the responses to people, and the place of drugs and alcohol in all of this conversation hasn't come up yet, and I want to at least put that out there. It's not a new thought, but at least to have that be another dimension of the conversation.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. For either one of you on campus, how have you seen the issue of alcohol, particularly in recent years, playing into all this?
Well, since I brought it up, I can talk about it. I mean, I think that basically probably one of the most dangerous environments for particularly women, because they tend, but also men. I don't want to limit it to women at all. Is an environment where there is a desire to get drunk or get someone drunk, or a desire to put, some kind of a what we call date rape drug in a drink, or those kind of things. And it's predatory behavior on the part in some instances, but I think in the more, granted, yes, there are predators who look for easy targets, or put people in very, very vulnerable position. That's one dynamic, but the other dynamic is the more broad dynamic, which is one of, if you are drunk or if drinking, and someone basically, and you're not in a position to say no, then and someone goes ahead and has sex with you, you really are raped. And non-consensual relationship. And so I hear, I don't go to these parties, obviously, as a chaplain. I'm not showing up at the parties.
You aren't invited?
I'm not invited. No, I'm not going to these parties. But on the other hand, students that talk with me about these situations or settings, they go because they're essentially wanting to fit in, be a part of a group, enjoy, connecting with other people, and they find themselves often in situations, either themselves or other people, of great vulnerability and, what I would call very dangerous situations. So I don't think that's changing. I'll be honest. I don't think it's changing. I think it's becoming more prevalent.
Is there any concern? Is there any concern expressed by students or student organizations about the issues of alcohol and alcohol abuse at this point, or is that just sort of a given in the culture?
It's not just alcohol. My goodness, I was leading services on Friday night, and the smell of marijuana comes wafting in across the backyard of Hillel House as they're smoking in the driveway right next door to us, and it's just omnipresent. But I think also it is about university leadership. We have abuse after abuse after abuse here, and absolutely nothing is done. And so there's no leadership either from the administration. Yes, the prevalence of drinking is really bad, and drugs and just substances that incapacitate young people is terrible, and the impact of it on a young person's brain is so much stronger too. Level of it, and as they unfortunately you see these addictive behaviors, it's deeply worrisome, and I don't see changes. I just make my own rules. So I say no alcohol in the building, because the one time we had managed of it at a kiddish, then one person got drunk, and none of my kids, my good kids sitting around the table, told me or intervened. And I said, because they're so used to it and they thought it was funny. I'm like, that's it, we're done. We're not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
Well, it's not a very popular issue to raise on campus, because it's so difficult to, quote unquote, police, to manage for institutions. And I think there's got to be some ways to at least provide, well, I know there are some safe spaces for students, but the bulk of the students, that's not where they're at. They don't want to give up that particular freedom that institutions really put on them. And most of the students are underage that are drinking. And I just think it's a nightmare to try to police it. And on the other hand, and I'm not talking about literal police, although that could happen too, but the only places I know in university and colleges I've looked at that it does get raised is when it's off-campus parties in houses in neighborhoods, and the neighbors get annoyed, and they're the ones that call out. But this is not about alcohol, and I want to be clear, this is really about the impact of drinking on vulnerability and inability to give consent, and also predatory behavior. And I just think it's a very, it's an issue, and it's one that I'd love to hear some strategies on. So,
well, let's move to talk for a few minutes quickly about the potential allies. Sort of, again, back to your comprehensive notion of everybody needs to be on the same page to address this. And we've thought about the student organizations, campus ministries, and faith communities. Parents, what are parents doing about this? I mean, what are alumni doing? It's, you know, if I had a kid going off to college at this point, I would be asking an awful lot of questions and wanting to know, you know, what's the deal if I'm going to send my kid to that university? Are you hearing from parents, or do you hear any of that discussion?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to talk briefly
Sara,
that
sorry.
I specifically ask parents who call me up about children who have some vulnerabilities, who have learning disabilities, who have a hard time, and they're looking at the university, this university, and I specifically tell them, do not send your children here, because I don't think they're the resources for them. But I think in this community, which is much poorer, parents keep their children at home sometimes instead of sending them to the dormitories for those fears. And I just want to apologize that I have to leave because I have to take my son to a doctor's appointment. And I'm
Thank you, Sarah.
Sarah, thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So, Lucy, in terms of your experiences with parents or alumni, what is anybody worried about this? Or?
Yes, it is. It is. I would say that that's something new that is showing up in the last 5 years. That often what happens is that a parent, we're literally our first-year students are moving in today, and here at Harvard, and often I have parents pull me aside and say things like, I hope my particularly daughter will be safe here, you know, and I mean, really, and at McAllister I had the same thing happening. So I would say that parents, because of much of what's happened in the media and much of the kind of social, societal focus on this issue, and parents literally being told that, you know, 1 out of 5 students will experience some sort of, you know, sexual assault, or women on campus, they're deeply concerned. And in parent sessions, I have more and more parents are asking questions. They kind of cloak it in, will my daughter or son be safe here? And oftentimes the responses will be, well, you know, Cambridge, Massachusetts, there are a lot of people around here, but we do everything we can. We have our Harvard police, we have our Harvard security, and sure, your son or daughter will be safe here. But that's, I don't think, fully what they're asking, whether they're going to be safe in the city and whether there's a good police force on and off campus. I think what they're really asking is the question underneath, will my daughter or son be safe in the living situation they're in? Will they be safe with their neighbors? Will they be safe in the shower? Will they be safe? And so I do think that this, the questions about and the worry on the part of parents is there. I have not seen much mobilizing, at least in my former job. I've only been at Harvard a year and a half, of parents to dealing with these questions. So in other words, the parents' councils are not stepping in and saying, we need to get a sexual assault prevention, parent support, you know, advocacy group on campus. I think it'd be a great idea. So I would say that parents have a lot more, if you will, pull and institutional impact than they realize. And, you know, there can be pains to administrators because, you know, you get a little tired of the helicopter parents always helicoptering in to take care of everything. And on the other hand, they need to do what parents do, myself being a parent, to advocate for our student, our child, you know, in an environment and make sure they're going to be able to be educated. So an alumni, I really have not I know a lot of alumni that have been in, and alumnae that have been in situations like this, but again, I have not been aware of efforts in advocacy, and I think it's a great, great way to step into advocacy.
Yeah, I see a lot of potential there because alumni potentially bring their professional resources and expertise and position in the community to bear, and I think that's would be a very important pushback, at least, or support of the university's efforts. And it strikes me as kind of stepping one step outside of that both parents and alumni are often members of our faith communities, and that our capacity on the outside in terms of congregational life to name this issue and encourage and support involvement with parents and alumni, particularly in university communities, might be another source of helping to move the discussion forward. Because one of the things that's disturbed me about the university response to many of these cases is the appearance that the strategy of the university is to avoid doing anything and keep it quiet. And if you read about the Baylor case, that's real clear in this one because the assailant was a star football player, and they really wanted him to be able to play. So they wanted to keep all this quiet so that he would be able to play.
Yeah.
He has been convicted now of the sexual assault. But, and again, it's like we don't want parents to know this because they won't send their kids here if they know that, 1 in 5 female students is being sexually assaulted on our campus. And it's sort of like, if I were a parent, what I want to know is, I know what's going on. What I want to know is, what are you doing about it? What are you affirmatively doing about it? How are you handling it? What's going to happen, when my kid gets there? That becomes a selling point to me as a potential parent of sending my kid to a school where I know they're really handling this. And, again, it always amazes me how institutions seem to always get this backwards somehow in terms of what needs to be happening around it. Let me just pause and see if there are questions or comments, anything that's coming through, Sara, that we need to know about.
Yeah, actually there is a question, and it was kind of related to the role that Sara has played for Melissa as someone who is in a faith community outside of the, regular spaces of the university where perhaps silence is being enforced. And so the question is about creating spaces that are safe for students, like campus ministry, and training campus ministers to support students and do prevention work against sexual violence while remaining outside of the pressures of the institutional agenda.
I'm glad to talk about that briefly. Last year here at Harvard, one of the programs that we did with our 35 Harvard chaplains, these are chaplains who are all hired by or sent by bodies outside of the university, but all hold a Harvard ID card. We did a program in connection with the sexual assault and prevention efforts here, and the office that oversees that, to not only talk about confidential conversation with students who had gone through and experienced sexual assault and harassment, but also to talk about how a chaplain can be helpful in helping in a kind of triage role around, here are your resources, here are your options if you choose to step into a reporting role. What are the ways that happens here? What are the ways that I can support you as a chaplain if you choose to go through that process? Because it's very, very challenging to go through the process and to be public. I mean, Melissa's story is a classic example of that, of once you go public and once it hits the campus, you know, isn't it like double and triple victimization, you know, that she ends up not being able to walk across campus, gets her car bashed into, ends up being, you know, humiliated and isolated. And so chaplains really can be in a role of not only counseling students and being in a pastoral support role, but also learning the university protocol or systems to then be able to get students to the people in the institution that at least should be supportive of them. And I think it's an incredibly important role, and I think having the range of to go through training with chaplains to make sure that they are clear not only about policy and procedure, but also about the issues of sexual violence on campus is absolutely essential.
So when you did that gathering last year, what was the response from
the response was
colleagues?
We had no idea that this was such a prevalent issue here on campus. We knew that but eventually they said we've all seen, had experienced students coming to talk with us about it, but we didn't know how pervasive it was. And deep appreciation and for the event and a request to continue with the efforts toward education and support of chaplains in this role. So a lot of, you know, very positive, what I would say, response. To it.
So that it becomes an ongoing agenda.
Precisely.
For campus ministry. So I want to ask you, Lucy, in terms of your experience, I know you've been very active in the National Organization of Campus Ministers over the years, and what is your sense there of the concern or interest or awareness at this stage?
Well, it's interesting. When I was telling a couple of colleagues about this, they told me that one of the organizations that I'm not terribly involved with, but I've attended their meetings on occasion, the National Association of College and University Chaplains, at their annual meeting coming up in 2016, will be dealing with questions of sexual assault on campus, and that will be the focus of that particular meeting. It's an annual gathering of chaplains, some 100 chaplains from small institutions, large institutions across the country. We're delighted. I am absolutely delighted that they are stepping into, we as chaplains are stepping in this conversation in not only a kind of on our campuses, but in a more kind of broadcast way. I would say particularly among, well, I can say among all chaplains that these questions and issues are definitely issues that arise on all of our campuses, and we're deeply concerned. And I think sometimes in most cases, chaplains on campuses are solo, so we really are the only chaplain for, say, 2,000 students, you know. Hello. But being soloed, that sometimes the agenda, we have so many things coming at us from different requests for all of the justice issues, plus pastoral care, plus being institutional, that sometimes the issues of sexual assault and violence are done in a more reactive or responsive way rather than a preventative or sort of an anticipatory way. And I think that we need to, that all of us would say that if we can be drawn in and do what we do well as chaplains, which is to be present out of our own spiritually informed and deeply compassionate selves, that's the strength of what we can contribute to our campuses. And I can say that, you know, I don't speak for all chaplains ever, I would never do that, but I can say that this issue is definitely an issue that we struggle with, that we talk a lot about, that we hear stories about from all of us, and we really, you know, as people seeking justice and peace on this planet and in our campuses, that we would be allies and advocates.
Right. And I do think that's the other dimension of your role that is potentially so important, is that leadership role around either individual advocacy with the individual students that may be coming to you, but also you don't even have a bully pulpit, you have a real pulpit.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
the capacity to raise issues within the community that people don't really want to talk about is, I think, just a huge resource and contribution that you can make. So we need to draw to a close here, and thank you everyone for joining us. The resources that Sarah's been putting up on the screen will be coming to you in the PDFs. And there are a number of links now. There's actually a lot of activity going on, a lot of organizing, and certainly resources for people to plug into and to join with. I wanted to bring us back and close with, I was just reading the Baylor material this morning about the Baylor case, and after the football player was found guilty yesterday, I think, actually, I mean, this literally is happening last week and this week. The Baylor University Assistant Vice President for Media Communications sent out this statement. I just wanted to read it. Acts of sexual violence contradict every value Baylor University upholds as a caring Christian community. In recent years, we have joined university efforts nationally to prevent campus violence against women and sexual assault, and to actively support survivors of sexual assault with compassion and care, and to take action against perpetrators. We've established and fully staffed a Title IX office that employs a Title IX coordinator and 2 full-time investigators. Maintaining a safe and caring community is central to Baylor's mission and at the heart of our commitment to our students, faculty, and staff. And I guess my hope is that a statement like this from the administration begins to manifest itself in reality, because this is the kind of position, as far as I'm concerned, that university leadership should be taking, but it's not being manifest at this point in too many places, as we heard even right now in Melissa's experience at the University of New Mexico. So we continue in our efforts together to address yet another aspect of sexual and domestic violence that tragically is affecting our young people in significant ways, and we continue to find ways, hopefully, that our faith communities are a part of the response and of the efforts to change the circumstances that allow this to continue. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Lucy, very much for taking time to join us, and blessings on your ministry. And Sara, would you like to highlight our next webinars?
Well, certainly. I would love to tell you about our next webinars. Everyone will receive this list later this afternoon, so you can join us. And thank you to our presenters. Thank you to InFaith Community Foundation, excuse me. And when you close up the webinar in the next few minutes, please take a moment to fill out the survey. And we would love your feedback on today's webinar, suggestions for future presentations. So please go to our website at faithtrustinstitute.org. The other thing I would suggest is, if you're interested in this topic or any of the topics that Faith Trust talks about, connect with us on Facebook, because we put up a lot of articles related to these issues that I think are really helpful in helping us explore what's going on in the world. So thank you so much for joining us today, and this ends our presentation. Have a good day. Thank you.